Like I promised, I am back at it again with a new history video. This is Historian 123, and I'm going to teach you about the Black Death. So the Black Death was unlike all the other events that we've been covering for the decline of feudalism, voice crack. It is actually a disease. It's not a war, it's not monarch, it's not a conflict, it's none of that. So, the Black Death, aka the bubonic plague, was started in Central Asia, and people thought that it was spread along the trade route called the Silk Road. It spread parts of China, India, and Europe. So then because of the Crusades, trade was getting bigger, so it spread like right away. Like instantly, it was spreading through other trade routes. The sickness was getting out of hand. It was getting out of control. Everyone was dying. Like, people coming back from ships on trade were already dead. Like, that's how bad it was. Now, it started in Central Asia, and it got all the way to Europe because we know that China was also a big trading place, so it went, like, everywhere. So, symptoms of the Black Death. Vomiting. Fevers. Coughing. Sneezing. Big egg-sized bumps. And black and blue botches or bruises on the person with the disease. Kind of disgusting. That's how it earned its nickname, the Black Death, because of the black spots that were formed. So, in October 1347, an Italian ship docked in Europe, and people on that ship were already dying from they thought was the Black Death. And this is how probably it all started. You know, if this trade boat didn't come, that stupid disease, the Black Death, would not have spread around the rest of Europe. Now, back then it was pretty easy to get sick because it was normal for a person to, like, wear the same clothes, like, for, like, a while. Like, a while to us is, like, 2 days, but no one does that. Like, they wore their clothes for, like, months at a time, and they'd never bathe. They, like, it was hard to get a bath when you were, like, a peasant, because you weren't that rich. You didn't have, like, running water. You didn't have that stuff. Like, the only people that could bathe, like, maybe, like, monthly, weekly, were monarchs. So the science behind the Black Death. So, fleas. Yes, they existed back then, of course, and so did rats. So fleas, they would feed on rats, and the bacteria that the fleas would get from the rats was carried around, and when the fleas, like, landed on humans or, like, came in contact with them in some way, the disease would spread. And rats were, like, everywhere. Like, they didn't have animal control. They didn't have, like, pest control stuff. Rats were roaming the streets everywhere, and it was pretty disgusting, you know. Not only were there rats, but the streets were also absolutely disgusting. The people were disgusting. There were, like, dead people, dead bodies, dead animals, and trash everywhere. Just in the street, rats eating it, fleas eating rats, disgusting crap. Ugh. So, like, mosquito season, like, in the summer, we get bitten by mosquitoes. We get mosquito bites in the summer. Like, I don't recall ever getting a mosquito bite in the winter. So, fleas were dormant during, like, cold seasons back then in the Middle Ages. So, in the warm seasons, they would come out. Of course, rats would come out as well. Bam. The Black Death would attack in every warm season. It was, like, that was the season. Like, it was the season that you could possibly die. So, people... Ugh. So there isn't, like, an explanation of how it was created because, like, we figured out Ebola, like doctors, scientists, they figured out Ebola in a pretty decent amount of time, but back then, they didn't have, like, scientists and stuff that were as intelligent as the people today, so they don't know exactly, like, how this whole Black Death was caused. I wonder if it exists today. The population decrease in China and Europe was, like, astonishing. Like, China's population was decreased by half. Like, imagine you're living, right, in a city, and then, like, after a few years go by, the Black Death sweeps in, your city is, like, half gone. Like, what? And that could be your family. That's, like, weird. Back then, half of China was 24 million people. 24 million, what the hell? Dying of the Black Death. So, like we said, the Italian ships docked, and that's how basically the Black Death started because of the trade routes. So people were, like, scared of the Italian people now because they thought the Italian people had the disease, but they didn't know that they already had it and they weren't going to get rid of it. They weren't professionals. They had no idea, like, they were going to die soon, most of them. They attempted to drive the Italians out of their cities and countries and stuff, but disease already spread. There was no choice. There was really no choice. You were stuck. You were stuck. You had to hope for the best. No cure was found ever. Still to this day, we don't need it. We don't have the Black Death anymore. In Europe, 25 million people died from 1000 to 1352. That's like 400 years, like 350 years. 25 million people dying. Like what? What the? So, like I always do in my videos, results. So, some results of the Black Death were, or the bubonic plague, were, so labor shortages, obviously less people, less workers. So, workers wanted higher wages, and they weren't going to get higher wages because they weren't going to, monarchs weren't just going to go from having a lot of workers and paying them to having less workers and giving them more money just because they're working harder. They don't care. So this led to peasant rebellions, and peasants were not that happy. So in the 1330s, they rebelled, and they really did not like this. But you know, some of them probably died too. This was an outgoing problem in France, Belgium, England, and Italy. You know, all these people were dying. Peasants, the worker value of a peasant was raising because there were less peasants to work. So people didn't want to die anymore. They were like, what the heck? They were like, this Black Death thing, it could kill me like any day. I get it. There's no like medicine for it, no cure. You're not going to take a bath. You don't have water. So they prayed. That was like their own cure. They prayed, and their prayers, they weren't delivered. They were not delivered. They just weren't. They still died. Family members died, even though they prayed. They prayed as hard as they could. All right, how monarchs, nobles, knights, and serfs and peasants were affected. So monarchs, they had less people to tax because someone dies, you don't have to tax them anymore. So that wasn't good because now they don't have as much money coming in. They didn't have anyone to tax, so it was not really good for anyone. Just didn't have any money now. So how nobles were affected, let's see. So nobles, there were less of them, obviously, because they were dying. And with less power, there was more power for peasants, because there was less control over the peasants. The more nobles there were, the more control they had over peasants, the more laborers they could gather up for them to make some more money. But they didn't have any more, because the nobles were also dying. They were just like average people, too. So for knights, the job of one knight became much harder, because so armies were dying. Like, it wasn't just the country. Like, the country is the army, too. So the army was dying, and that made the work of a knight much harder than it used to be, because now the armies weren't as big, so a knight actually had to be good. Like, he couldn't just be like some scrub who had a crossbow and can shoot good. Since there were less nobles, for the peasants and serfs, they had more freedom and more job opportunities. And I think you can see this pattern now. Peasants literally had a positive outcome out of all of these events that I'm talking about. Alright guys, hope you learned a lot about the Black Death, or the bubonic plague, aka. I'll be back tomorrow with a new video on the 100 Years' War. Actually, I'm going to make it in a few seconds. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and no bad words because that hurts people's feelings. See you guys.